So lesson 8, we're going to talk about identity and account management controls. What things are we putting in place in order to uh, administer the type of usernames, identities that we give in our objects, and then how do we actually manage the accounts once they're set up and running. So when we're jumping in identity access management, there's a bunch of controls we can put in place in order to help us uh, be more secure when we're giving access to people, and also just kind of validating their authorization. So we can use certain things like certificates and smart cards. A lot of certificates you'll see uses when it comes to public key cryptography. We can also use tokens, and tokens will give us this type of validation that this person is who we say they are, because we may have given them a username and password, but we also gave them a token to, we assigned them a token to actually validate the username and password. So we can use those things. We can also use identity providers such as Federated Identity Management, where if I log into one web page, then automatically another web page may accept me because of our by me knowing a mutual party. So a lot of times what you want to think about is when you can go to a certain website and they say, hey, if you have a Google account, then log in with your Google account. You won't have to set one up. We'll automatically trust the fact that you have a Google account in order to create this account with us. And from here on out, whenever you create that account, you can use your Google account or Gmail account to actually log into that website. So when bringing on a new individuals, you need to make sure that you have an onboarding process as well as an offboarding process. Onboarding meaning we have a checklist, or we make sure that we have everything in process, that once you come through our doors, we know exactly what information to give you and what not to give you. More importantly, we know how to create your account. We know how to give you permissions to where you can print to certain printers, be able to share files within your first day, and you're not sharing out of your scope of the things that you need to do in your work day. So we want to make sure that HR has the proper person policies, making sure IT has their proper policies as well, and that everyone that we bring on, that is it's a almost a cookie cutter type deal to where everyone has the same process. Also, we want to make sure that we do the opposite whenever we let someone go, someone gets fired or quits, or God forbid passes on. We want to make sure that we have a offboarding process as well, making sure that we take away permissions, we take away cell phones, any kind of tablets that they may have, laptops, tokens, anything that we have given them. We need to make sure we get that stuff back. And we also want to make sure that there's a policy for that, as well as a checklist for that, making sure that, hey, once so John is terminated from this job, the proper personnel is aware, not only just the security to make sure that they are escorted off the premises, but to make sure that the proper personnel is in IT knows that this person is gone, so we can disable his account or her account. We also want to make sure that in the onboarding process, or in the interview process, that we might want them to sign an NDA. Maybe the job that we're bringing them on for, we need to tell them trade secrets or important information that makes us unique in our field. And so in order to give them that information, maybe we want them to sign a non-disclosure agreement saying that you won't talk to anybody else if you're not selected for this job. So just making sure that we have all these things in plan to take a new personnel, as well as to offload someone. So now that we got our personnel into the office, we need to make sure that we have policies in place for them to follow on a day-to-day basis. We may need to make sure that we have separation of duties in place, making sure that they're not just have to do everything, that we have managers in place in order for them to do certain tasks that should be taken away from them. So to give a good example on that is that if a bank teller has the permissions to print a check, then they should not have the permissions to cash the same check. They should have to go to their manager or floor manager or whoever in order to cash that check. That should be a separation of the duty. Now, we have least privilege, and we want to make sure that we give them only the enough permissions for them to do their job on a day-to-day task. We don't want to over load them with permissions in order to see every file that's here on the directory. We want to make sure that we only give them enough permissions in order to see what they need to see. And this is needed because if they're compromised with their account and a hacker gets into their account, then we don't have to worry about them seeing more than what they're actually able to see. They can see only what Bob can see in the mailroom, and he doesn't have access to the marketing department. So make sure that we have least privilege in entailed on our accounts. We also want to make sure that we have job rotation. So kind of going with the separation of duties, job rotation is not having you do the same job year in and year out, or even if we want to rotate the functions that you may do quarterly throughout that year. Right. So in order to do that, we're just going to make sure that our training process is up to par, because a lot of us, the reason why we probably stay in one spot is because we can't actually train you in another spot. Right. But if we can rotate you out, then we can have you doing something totally different every quarter. Therefore, if you were, let's say, you were sneaking money out from one account to your account every month, you were just sneaking that money out, and then we rotate the jobs. Now you're not able to have access to those accounts, and we get Susie to come in and do your job. Then we can see, oh, okay, wait, we had logs of this money going to Bob's account every month, but now all of a sudden it stopped. So that's why we kind of want to have that job rotation to kind of weed out those processes that we don't have an awareness of. So we want to make sure that we have that job rotation. We also want to make sure that we have a mandatory vacation too, just to kind of, piggyback on that job rotation. Let's say if we can't rotate jobs, we can have mandatory vacations where we tell you to go home for 2 weeks and see if anything arises, any kind of different processes comes up, and now all of a sudden we found out that this was going on while you were over it. So now we can ask those questions and get those things ironed out, or we could take the appropriate actions. So like I said, HR needs to have those onboarding processes, but we also, like I said, to have those offboarding processes, making sure that we get everything back. We want to get our laptops back, phones. We give out phones, but make sure we take them back. Make sure we change the phone number. And we just don't give the same phone number back to the new guy or the new girl that's coming onto the job, right? Making sure that we take back tokens, bank credit cards. I'm sorry, not bank credit cards, but business credit cards, just in case, you had someone that was traveling, and sometimes you forget to get those type of items back, USBs, USB thumb drives. And these are things that we accumulate over our time, our tenure at our business, and we just accumulate all this business assets, and we just don't. We sometimes a breakup, or let's say if I'm really mad and I quit the job, then do I have a policy in place to say, hey, Lee's not gonna come up to the business to give back the stuff. Can we remote wipe the cell phone that he kept? Can we remote wipe the laptop that he kept? What information was on that laptop? Can we shut it down in any other way? Because I may not get that back. Let's say if you have an employee suddenly pass on, then how do you go about respecting the family but also protecting the business at the same time? What is the process on that? So we want to make sure that we have all those policies ironed out, and making sure that we have just as a robust onboarding processes, that we have a offboarding processes that just as robust to keep the business safe, keep it moving forward, but at the same time getting back what assets you may have given out to that employee. So when creating accounts, we want to make sure that we have privileges uh, limited to what a user can do at their job and nothing more, right? But we also want to make sure that we put in different policies like password policies, and we also want to make sure that they don't have permissions to change any kind of system configurations. To give an example, is that once I give Bob the credentials to log into a computer at work, do I really want him to add his own printer or his own device uh, at on his login account? So we want to make sure that we don't give them any kind of system configuration rights, and have, unless it's part of their job to do so. So if we have Susan who's just got added onto the IT team, then she needs to have a privilege account in order to allow those type of changes to happen. Whenever we have guest accounts for our third party vendors that come in, we need to make sure that they have an anonymous log on, something that we're going to throw away as soon as they're done with whatever business that they're bringing on to the company. So we want to make sure that we really limit their accounts to only the things that they need, and that's pretty much just internet access. But we want to make sure that we lock down those type of accounts. So we touched on group-based policies just a tad bit whenever I was talking about we create a group. Let's say we create a group for marketing, the marketing team, and we want to make sure that they can go to their marketing printer. They can talk to each other all within the department just fine. They can share files with each other. They can look at the files that each other has made, and we want to make sure that policies for that group accounts for everyone that's in that group. So if we can create a group in Active Directory with a certain amount of policies for a particular group, and we know how their business and their operations work, we can limit their permissions only to their job needs. And so whenever we have someone come on to the organization or leave the organization, only thing we have to do is really just take them out of the group, and or put them into a group in order to have those permissions or to take those permissions away. Now let's talk about admin accounts, super user accounts, root accounts. These are accounts that are pretty much can make any changes to the network. But as a security professional, you don't want to give someone super user account, or in the industry, sometimes we'll say a God account, to where there are the only ones that can make the changes. Now, I get it if the corporation or the company is very small and it's a handful of administrators, it may be an account that has a super user does all account. But we want to make sure that we're very careful with these type of accounts, because these are what the intruders, the attackers, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for these type of accounts that can do all and go wherever they want to go on the network and manipulate anything that they want, because it has the permission to do so. So instead of me as a hacker trying to create my own account, why not just get an account that already has those permissions already applied to them? So we want to make sure that if we do have administrators on our network, that we give them permissions to make changes. But what changes can they make? Can they change passwords? Um, and if they can change passwords, can they change group policies? And if they can change group policies, maybe they can't allow websites or disable antivirus software. So we want to make sure that we give them permission, but not all the permissions. And we want to make sure that we understand how the business works, how accounts work, and that way we can delegate the permissions accordingly. Now, going along with those admin accounts, sometimes you will run across these service accounts, and a service account is kind of like this generic admin account that you may get with a product that you just bought or you just got out of the store. So, let's say if you just bought a router or an extender for your network, it may come with a service account, a generic admin account that has the permissions of a administrator. The thing to be aware about those type of accounts is that a lot of us do not understand where they're at. So the router in your house may have a service account actually stamped onto that physical router. So, whenever you can, just pause this video and go and look at your router and see if there's a service account linked to it. It may have a username of admin and the password of an admin. And if you would to plug in the the web page for your device, you could use that credentials to get in and make the changes on your router. So we need to be aware that these service accounts are out there, and we need to make sure that we are able to get into those, change passwords, change the credentials, and maybe take some of the permissions away on those type of accounts, or make sure that we just at the least change the password on them. So this slide pretty much reiterates what I said in the previous slide with the generic accounts. And they're kind of like generic admin accounts, but we also have shared accounts that, let's say in certain examples, would be kind of like we're working in a bank and we need to print checks. Maybe we have a standalone machine that's off in the corner somewhere, and we're just using that as tellers to print checks. Well, instead of giving people permission for that, since it's a standalone machine, we may have a one login machine, login credentials for that machine. And then now it's shared among the 10 or 11, 12 people that's in that particular branch for that bank. And so we need to make sure that those credentials that's on those standalone machines that are shared accounts, we want to make sure that our users are very aware about the security of those accounts, and then making sure that we go in as administrators on that account. And then, like I said, kind of trimming it down, trimming the permissions down to where it can only do but so much damage. Now, when you're building out your accounts, you can get real granular on how much information you want to put in there. But from a security standpoint, how much information do you really want to put into your attributes when it comes to building your accounts? So we want to make sure that we have a naming scheme, some type of account name, username. Is it going to be first and last name? Is it going to be first initial, last name? Is it going to be something totally different, where it's just like a randomized letter and number scheme that can be assigned to your users? Just keep these things in mind. It's good to have is user friendly whenever your username is first and last or first initial last name, but when it comes to, let's say, reconnaissance on the hacker side, if I'm doing any kind of reconnaissance on, let's say, LinkedIn, then if I have a name in place and a company to link it to, then I can easily figure out the first part, which is your username. And then now the hard part would be the password. But if I had a random jumble of letters and numbers, then now you're making it much harder for the hacker to figure out usernames at least. Now, yes, it is kind of harder on your clients to remember something new, but you do run the risk of some clients or some users writing down their username and password. But I would rather go with having that than you're never going to change your name. You're never going to the likelihood of you changing your name is low. So I would rather go that route versus of having something random for your username versus usernames being your name or initials. So we talked about the account password policies a little bit, and this is we want to make sure that we have a strong policy in place, and we have a rotating policy. And what I mean by rotating policy is meaning that our users change their passwords on a 3-month basis. From what I've seen is pretty much standard. We want to make sure that we have a length character of somewhere from between 8 to 14 characters. We want to make sure that it is complex, where we are using a combination of alphabets, numbers, special characters, things of that nature. Remember, whenever we make the character or the password longer, that is harder to brute force. So that's why if you ever wonder why uh, it needs to have all of these contexts into a password, it's because the brute forcing technique takes a lot longer to actually put in, and different characters and different type of symbols when it comes to our passwords. So again, we also want to make sure that we change it every 3 months, or the more you change it, the better. But we also want to make sure that we don't have a reuse on our passwords. I've seen some places where they allow 10 password changes, and then they allow you to reuse after the 10th password change. But some places I've also been where you get no reuses, and really it shouldn't be any excuse for reuses. You should be able to take small phrases and encrypt it, not encrypted, that's the wrong word, but cipher different letters and symbols into a small phrase in order to create your new password. I'll show you a video on how I come up with passwords and how you should teach your users how to do the same thing. Also, lastly, we can have password hints or some type of forget password link for our users that's having trouble with their passwords, and we can have security questions set up in order for them to go the next step in order to reset their passwords. So, like I said it earlier, I wanted to show you how I make my passwords and how I go about whenever I'm forced to change my passwords, or not really don't want to say forced, but it's good practice to change your passwords. I take a short statement like this: I love cookies, and then I'm going to go about putting my uppercase and lowercase in there, as well as just throwing some numbers in there along with my favorite dollar sign. So I replace my circles, I replace my O's with zeros, as well as threes are probably going to represent the E's. If I have any A's in there, that's going to be represented by 4. And then I use a symbol. I use let's say a star or underscore. I might use a dollar sign. So I use all of these things just to kind of really start with my phrase, but just change letters out in order to make it more complex. But I'm still following that same phrase, right? So whenever I'm typing in my password, I know that it's I love cookies, but I have it embedded in my brain that I'm replacing some vowels with the numbers. Now, along with those account attributes, you can have account restrictions, such as like a geo mapping or some type of network location to where you're having access to your network or not. So the first thing that pops up in my mind is kind of like a VPN. If someone is able to log in with their VPN, then they can have access. So that account is linked to the network, the internal network of the company. And we, in order for us as external users on an external network, we need to get to the internal via VPN, and it can be linked in that way when it comes to your account. You can also have a time-based restrictions on your account. So if we want our users to maybe work from 8 to 5 o'clock and maybe give a grace period at 6 o'clock, then we want everything, we could put that restriction in for 7 o'clock until 7 o'clock the next morning, to where we don't allow users to VPN in, or we don't allow users to come into the building, or if you happen to get into the building, you can't log in at that point in time. So these things allow for better security, as far as if there's no reason for us to be working at 2 o'clock in the morning, then we can put the restrictions in. So if we do see any activity at 2 o'clock in the morning, it raises a red flag. We can take the appropriate actions. Now, from time to time, we want to make sure that we have account audits. Auditing is just checking behind the processes in place, the configurations that are in place. In this case, the accounts that have been put into place in the groups. What type of permissions did we put out there? Do we have the right permissions for the marketing team? Do we have the right permissions for our financial team? Do we need to take things away? What have we learned? And then are we doing it right? This is pretty much how a audit should work. And then it helps us to perform better, because we can always go back and say, hey, you know what? This is not allowing us to be more secure, and it's not allowing the business to move forward. So we can always have these audits to help us out, cleaning up what we already have in place. So let's talk about account lockouts and disablement of accounts. So we want to make sure that we have this type of a policy implemented into our organization for several reasons. You want to lock out, of course, someone when they get their account or password wrong, maybe after 5 times. A thing that you may or may not know is that after 30 minutes time waited after your fifth chance and a lockout, then your account is automatically unlocked. There is a configuration in there to where it stays locked, and then the only one that can unlock you is the IT team, or whoever is the administrator over the Active Directory. But we want to make sure that we are locking accounts out, and that we are disabling accounts that are not needed with the company anymore. We want to make sure that if Bob leaves the network, or I'm sorry, Bob leaves the company, then we disable his account, not necessarily delete his account, but disable his account, in order for him to not use that same username and password, in order to, maybe go to an external login or network, and then get back into the business side of the network, log in with his old account that we never disabled, and then be able to pull or transfer files or what have you. So we want to make sure that we disable. The reason why I said we don't need to delete is because maybe we need to keep some files that he had. Maybe we need to search his account. Maybe it's a necessary duty that we go through his account and make sure that he didn't do anything malicious. So we want to make sure that that account is disabled, but not necessarily deleted. So in further classes, we'll go over how long we should keep certain documentations. So this is another attribute to what you want to do when it comes to disabling an account. So when bringing on individuals, making users onto our network, we can either have them grouped into certain groups, and then they have permissions and rights that way, or we can have based off the resources that they're going to be working with, or the ownership is going to determine what type of rights that they have. So when it comes to ownership, resource ownership, then we're going to talk about discretionary access control. That's hey, you work for me, so I'm going to say that you need to have access to these documents, and that's discretionary. On my discretionary, I'm going to give you access or request access. And then you have role based. Role based is more likely what you're going to see into the real world. You're going to be able to be lumped into a group. If you're working in the marketing department, then you will be lumped into the marketing group and get the policies and the permissions that the marketing group will receive. And the same thing goes for finance, HR, different departments that you may have in a 9 to 5 type of organization. So just to kind of go into ACLs. ACL stands for Access Control List, and this is where we pretty much we give people permission based on their role or group or time in the organization. We give them permission on what they can and cannot do when it comes to their username and the resources we have on the network. So maybe you cannot print to the printer that's on floor 15, but yet you can go and see whatever documents that we have in for the contracting group. So when creating different users, we want to make sure that we have different standards for those type of users, and we want to make sure that we don't give them more permissions that they actually need to do their job. A lot of times we can go ahead and just give someone all the assets in the world. Yes, it creates less work for us to actually come back and maybe dumb down those permissions. It creates less work that way, but from a security standpoint, if you're giving them that much access to different things on your network, then you're opening yourself up to a bigger risk of being attacked. But when developing ACLs, we not only just have role-based access controls, we can also have mandatory access controls, which is abbreviated for MAC. A lot of times you'll see this in the government sector. I know a lot of time when I was in the military that we would use labels and clearances to actually show what type of access you have, whether it be private, confidential, um, um, unclassified, secret, top secret. So you will see these type of things whenever you're um, studying for the exam. Just think whenever you're seeing labels or clearances, then you're probably talking about a mandatory access control. We also have attribute-based access control, which is a combination of the subject and the object, where you're the actual subject and then the object you're trying to get to will be the printer on the 15th floor. So you can have those type of attributes determine what type of assets you have throughout the company. You can also have rule-based access controls, and this is where it's not determined by the users or the managers that's in the organization. It's determined by the system, and it's more of a stricter access, but a very secure access as well. So, and sometimes when authenticating to a certain site, you may have certain sites that trust each other on a federation level, and they say, "Hey, if you log into one, then we automatically trust you to coming in and accessing this account on our side." So a lot of times you'll see kind of like these inner workings together, and that's where you get OAuth and OpenID kind of connecting these accounts together on different sites. You see it when it comes to different websites as well as from a website down to a mobile app. So going back to our onboarding process, whenever we're bringing on new individuals to our network, we want to make sure that we put out different policies that they know the terms on which we allow certain behavior. A lot of times, everyone who's been hired on have probably signed an acceptable use policy, AUP, and that's pretty much laying out the guidelines of what you're allowed to do and what will not be tolerated at this organization. So we want to make sure that our policy strictly outlines everything that we are willing to allow on our network. You also want to make sure that in some cases you want to make sure that you have a rules of behavior when it comes to social media. Are you allowed to take pictures within the organization and then post them on social media? It's not necessarily how much you can post in your actual saying in a statement, but then if you're letting out secret information or confidential information in a post, then we need to have policies against that too. So just make sure that we outline these type of things are what kind of behavior we are willing to accept of our users. We also want to make sure that this is where we outline if they're going to bring in their own phone to use within the organization, or we're going to give them a phone. Um, you know, once they if they're going to bring into the organization their own phone and then put corporate emails on their phone, then technically that information is outside of the care of the organization. So how would they need to monitor that? How would we need to have our users take care of that information that's on their personal phone? So all those things need to be outlined on a policy, and make sure that our users sign those policies upon entry. So what you want to do on I would say a monthly basis, but more of an annual basis, is we want to train our users. We want to make sure that our users understand what we want to have them do within the organization, right? So kind of reiterating that acceptable use policy, we want to make sure we train our users on the different types of security policies that we have, what to do, how to handle data that's leaked out, or maybe before you actually make a mistake and sending out confidential information, what to do when you're faced with that adversity. So we want to make sure that they know what to do, how to react, and then the appropriate things to use, or appropriate things to say when it comes to divulging different type of data that's secret to the organization. Now, like I said, this training normally happens yearly, and we often have to sign off on it, saying to a governing body that we have taken the training. But a lot of times you can have those training broken up into different types of methods, right? So not only can we have them go into a certain website and do different scenarios and simulations with a computer-based training, but we also can have phishing campaigns that go out throughout the year, quarterly, or maybe twice a year, if you really want to just kind of test the waters when people are getting into their workflow, making sure that they're going in and doing the things that they need to do on a daily basis. We might want to just throw a phishing campaign out on a quarterly basis, and making sure that they understand what a phishing email looks like. Because sometimes when you get into that flow of just working, looking at emails become redundant. So you want to make sure you test your users to see if they're on their toes, and see exactly how a good phishing email looks and how to react to it. So the key points to remember when it comes to identity access management is that this is a baseline of when users come onto our network. What do we give them permissions to do? What do we give them permissions to see? And how do we manage that as they go through their tenure here at the business? So just knowing that if you have a good grasp on your users, and when it comes to their accounts and how it's made, and then the properly disposing of them, put you in a great position to not have to worry about their accounts being compromised and then being taken advantage of by an unworthy individual. So lesson 9, let's talk about securing network designs. How are we gonna put things in place in order to make our network more secure, and keeping them out of sight of the bad guys? So the one thing that you're going to learn as a security professional is that we always have some type of best practice, and networks is no different. We actually want to follow what works in our industry, and seeing what others have done to make their network more secure is something that we could probably use in our environment, right, in whatever sector that we're in. But a lot of times we want to make sure that when we start designing our network, that we actually set things up in a secure manner. We have security in mind. So we want to make sure that we not only think about what type of encryption that we want to use on our networks, but we also want to know about the single points of failure. Is it easy for one router or asset point to go down, and then now no one can get on that network? Is it easy to break into the passwords, actually get access like that? Is it accessible from outside the building? Can people from the parking lot actually get access to your network and then snoop around and make lateral movement? So all these things you want to make sure in the designing phase and throughout the changes that you make, right? So just because the network is set up and running, we also need to make sure is it as is it efficient enough to be secure enough, right? So do we need to make changes throughout its life cycle? And you want to make sure that we design the network in a secure manner, always having security in the forefront of the mind when designing our network. And so when you're designing stuff of your network for whatever, whether it be the house or your home office or whether it's a small business or enterprise, you want to know how data flows in and out of your network. So you want to know if we're in a small business and we're trying to set up a network for a dentist office, we want to make sure what devices do they have on the network, and then what are we doing to send out different data? Are we just checking email? Are we downloading files from a cloud provider? What are we doing on a daily day basis? And that's knowing your workflow, knowing your business architecture, where we know exactly what the business is doing to make money. And then now, how do we formulate a plan around the network in order to make making money more secure, right? So that's how we want to look at things, and we want to just know every detail about how business is conducted in this whatever venture we're in, and then we want to make those things secure. So if you're not familiar with the OSI model, I want you guys to take it upon yourself to actually Google the OSI model and look at the different layers about how data is transferred from one device to the next. But this picture right here is pretty much showing how data comes into your network. So at the physical layer, that where the telephone cable that may goes into your, not the telephone cable, but the RJ45 that goes into your laptop, that Ethernet cable, that goes in, and then it actually communicates with the NIC card that's in there to the network closet that you may be connected to, or the Wi-Fi signal, and you're connected to that access point. And as you see right here on the first layer, you'll see that switch and that access point. That's where the data is coming in. So if I send you an email, it's going to show up at that access point and then wait for some type of communications to your device in order to, actually bring it up to the application layer, which is layer 7, in order for you to actually see what's going on. So this diagram here just kind of shows a quick overview of how these layers look. Now, mind you, it's 7 in all, but you just see your main ones here when it comes to networking and how data comes into the network, and this is how it flows out. So it starts at that application layer, and then it goes down. It breaks down into layer 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Once it gets back to layer 1, and it turns into bits, ones and zeros, and that's how it goes across the network to its destination. Its destination being a router in Atlanta, or just someone that's on the fifth floor while you're on the third. So that's how data is actually transported from station to station. And we also want to look at this kind of this diagram by showing where we want our firewalls to be put at. Sometimes we may want to put our proxy servers in different spots in order to take our data, analyze our data, or maybe even redirect our data when it comes in, kind of like redirecting the traffic or making a detour if we needed to. So this is a good example of that. And like I said, if you're not familiar with the OSI model, please take your time, Google it real quick, and read up on it and watch some videos on it. Network segmentation is one of the best ways we can make our networks more complex, not putting everything on one network, being able to segment the network off into different VLANs and have different devices talk to or be on the same IP wavelength as other devices that they're actually doing the same thing. I think it shows a complexity that you've put thought and effort into your network, but it also it's a hindrance to a individual trying to hack onto your network and then trying to see what's actual valuable on your network. So if we want to separate our marketing department away from our financial department, it serves a lot of a more of a purpose than just lumping everybody in onto one network. Now, this slide talks about network topologies and zones. So when you're into the networking field, you're going to probably be looking at everything from a high level, but also you're able to get into the weeds of your network. So whenever you're looking at a topology, you're probably looking at images on a PowerPoint or some type of diagram, and it looks similar to what you see here on the screen. And so in order to have it logically in your mind of how the building is set up network wise, this is where you get topologies at. And then now if we have everybody that's on the second floor who's within the financing department, then we could say that they're all on the same network, or in this case, let's say they're all on the VLAN 100, or and then everybody who's in legal is on VLAN 110. And so we can break them up in uh, a logical format that we can understand it a little bit easier. Is easier on the eyes instead of just looking at a bunch of IP addresses and then trying to understand the nomenclature about how our network is actually situated. So again, you'll see different groups broken up on a piece of paper wise, but it's not necessarily that like that when you get into the building. You have people who may be on a mobile, uh, be a mobile device to where they move from floor to floor. Maybe they don't even work in that building. But we have them on a particular VLAN in order to receive updates or to receive any type of permissions that we want them to have or maybe take away. So just keep that in mind when it comes to topologies. Topologies is going to be that diagram, kind of looking at all the images, and then the zones will be those groupings that we want to put similar devices together, people who work together in certain departments. We want to put those into those zones. So DMZs is a place where we can put some of our servers that are web facing out into this kind of like an isolated area. So it blocks off the traffic that comes from the outside where our users are actually interacting with the server, and then is a backdoor into our network, right? But it stands in the middle of the outside world versus coming into our internal network. And a DMZ sits there and takes all the, let's say, orders for t-shirts, and then it pushes the information or the data from that DMZ into our internal servers where we can take the data and fulfill the order of that t-shirt. So DMZs is a good way of just kind of isolating something that we need for it to be out to our customers or our users, something that they can touch and actually put information in, but we don't want them to actually come into our internal network and then place those same orders or put in different information, different data on our internal networks, because you don't know who they are, right? So we can use DMZs for this action. Now we also have something called based in host, and it's kind of the same thing. Or you'll hear some people may use honeypots, something that's out there sitting um, away from the internal network, but it's accessible for outside networks, or if, in the case of a honeypot, then it's out there for a hacker to actually see, and then actually try to manipulate. And then what we're doing as security professionals, we're logging that information down and learning from whatever tactics that they're using on that machine. So hopefully we all are familiar with IPv4. That's where you'll do your command prompt. You'll bring up your command prompt. You'll type in ipconfig, and then it'll come back with some information about what kind of IP you got from your router. And more than likely, it's gonna it's gonna have a 4 octets, and those octets are separated by the periods or the dots in between those numbers, and that's an IPv version 4 type of address. The thing about that is that it's set to it's only set to so many addresses in the world. So that's why we have different classes, and different businesses have different types of classes of IP addresses. So if you think about it, if we're set to so many IPv4 addresses, then eventually someone will have the same IP address, right? So if we set them up in classes, then we can use something we call NAT, network address translation, to when we send information outside of our network, then it uses NAT to change into a public IP address, and then uses NAT again to change back into a private once it reaches its destination. But on this slide, we're talking about IPv version 6, and version 6 is pretty much it's a never ending type of address, to where it's enough to give everything in our network and a unique address, as well as our internet of things. So we're thinking watches, doorbells, let's say smart refrigerators, our cars, anything that needs network address, we can give it a IPv version 6 address, and it'll be able to communicate just as well when it comes to the network. So the main things that we want to make sure is that IPv6 has a more secure it has a more secure version to it than IPv4. But the thing is that everybody is not equipped or ready to make that switch from IPv4 to 6. So you will see more people using 4 than actually 6. So just keep those things in mind. But it is a more secure method of using network addressing. It's just that we're not ready to actually make that transition over. So not only to having VLANs and segmentations physically on the network, we can have certain things such as having a data center, alternate data center that's out there, or a data center that's not in the necessary same region as us. A lot of people now may go to the cloud and have that be their data center. That the cloud gives this access of having a greater availability factor to your actual data center that your company may have. Is robust in the cloud, to where the availability is there seamlessly forever. And so it has a greater chance of the data has a greater chance of being accessed, versus if, let's say, if there's a big storm coming into the city and your data center is in the same city as your building, and then now no one can work from home because not only is the city out of power, your data center is also out of power. Therefore, no one can access the data. So the cloud kind of eliminates that single point of failure, so to say. We can also have zero trust, and zero trust. The implementation, the thought behind zero trust is just constantly validating and not trusting one federation to another, right? We're constantly validating any input that we get. And therefore, if we're constantly validating, then pointing out any type of any type of action that is not validated or authenticated, then it's easy to point out and then actually discard of. So when it comes to networks, a lot of times you're gonna hear as a security professional is the man in the middle attack, and that's where we're sniffing that network. We're intercepting that traffic that's going across the airwaves or on the landline, and we're actually observing that type of traffic and seeing if we're able to see what's going across the network, right? So we want to avoid those type of attacks. Again, you'll see a lot of people, as a security professional, we'll see a lot of times that's being associated with Wireshark, having that tool be able to sniff the network and then gather those type of packets, right? But we also have spoofing. And a lot of times you'll see, especially on this test, we'll see where spoofing is associated with MAC addressing. So where even though MAC addresses are supposed to be unique to every device, MAC addresses could also be spoofed by certain software to make it seem as if you're supposed to be on the network. So a lot of old networks probably, if we have only a small amount, let's say 10 PCs that we want to have on the network, if we wanted to provide security, we'll just say, hey, for these 10 devices, we'll take the 10 MAC addresses and then make them we'll make sure that they're the only ones that can get an IP address on the network. Well, sometimes I could spoof that, and then now instead of you giving me a DHCP constantly changing my IP address, you think that I'm already on the network, so you automatically give me one, right? And now I'm spoof my way onto the network, and now I can traverse wherever I please, or see if I can traverse, right? We also have ARP poisoning and MAC flooding attacks. ARP poisoning is just the broadcasting of unsolicited ARP replies, trying to spoof MAC addresses. And then we have MAC flooding, where we're over flooding the switch, trying to trigger a unicast flooding. So we want to make sure that we understand these type of attacks do go on, and that's why it's so important to understand the man in the middle, being able to be onto our network and sniff our network and then apply these type of attacks to our network. So we also want to provide a prevention on looping within the network. So we want to apply the spanning tree protocol, where we don't want to cause what we call a denial of service on ourselves by having a broadcast or a flooding unicast given out on the network, constantly sending packets back and forth, and the units don't know what to actually do with it because it's coming in so fast. So it causes a denial of service within the network. So we want to make sure that we set it up with the spanning tree protocol in order to provide a better so just in case we plug in different Ethernet, or we plug in a Ethernet into a wrong port, that we don't cause a network outage, right? So this is what we want to make sure that this goes into our planning and designing the network in the beginning, right? So in order to protect us, we kind of want to have port security. So on those routers and those switches, if you ever seen them, we have, sometimes we don't use all the ports on them, right? But sometimes when configuring these switches and routers, we leave those ports activated. So whenever you do plug in an Ethernet cord, you may be on DHCP, so you automatically add it to the network, right? So, and we want to go into the configurations, the settings of those devices, shut those type of ports down, disable them, and then carry on. And if someone needs to actually use them, then we put in the proper change for it and actually enable those ports in order for use. We also may want to look into MAC filtering, right? So any MAC address that we're not familiar with doesn't get an IP, doesn't get onto the network, and that way we can cut down on the MAC spoofing that's could be going on our network, right? So we want to make sure that we put these type of things in play. just goes back into our planning, our setting up our architecture, or how we actually want to configure our devices once we get them open and out the box. So network access control is when we want to put some type of endpoint on devices, like a laptop. And so whenever we have people come into our network, not everybody can just get onto our network and then start browsing or doing snooping around, different types of folders that may be on our network. So we want to put this type of, let's say, a agent on our desktop or our laptops, and just to kind of have like that a common piece to know that, hey, this device is a known asset. It's allowed onto our network. This is a good way to create another defense in depth product. So having that endpoint type of control will be able to easily point out people who are not allowed onto our network, right? So if we only want to, let's say if we're a small business and we only have 15 devices that's into our network, but then all of a sudden we see 20 devices. Now we got to say, okay, these four, or I'm sorry, these five new devices, we can go ahead and kick off the network. And if it's legitimate traffic or a legitimate device, we can then make an exception for them and then bring them on, or more importantly, put our endpoint agent on that PC or device in order to keep track of it, and then make any type of changes or updates to it accordingly. So the main thing I want to talk about on this slide is the SSID, your service set identifier, and that's when if you're on a Windows machine, you'll look down at your Wi-Fi signal, that the little symbol you have there, whenever you want to connect to a new network, and you want to make sure that if it doesn't need to be broadcast, if that SSID doesn't need to be broadcast as a network administrator, go ahead and just shut that off. There's no need to broadcast it out if everyone is automatically connected to it. And the reason why we want to go ahead and shut it off is because it's a good way for me to go and create another SSID that's similar to it. So if my SSID says Bayonet 1, then I can, as a hacker, I can go in and say, okay, everybody's connected to Bayonet 1. Why don't I just create a Bayonet 2 with a rogue access point and see who I can get to connect to mine? Because employees are not necessarily tech savvy to understand why, as administrators, we do what we do. So whenever someone comes in from a long day of work and they're just trying to connect to the network, and they don't really know if there shouldn't be a Bayonet 2 SSID, they just want to get to the internet. Yeah, so we just want to make sure that we can disable that if possible. And then if we need to broadcast it out, make sure that our employees know which ones to contact and which ones is a legitimate one. So if they see any type of rogue access point, then they can go ahead and report that to the proper authorities. So just to kind of add more on to the wireless access point, when we're setting up our wireless access points, whether we're in a business environment or we're back at the house, or some type of we're setting up a wireless device at our friend's house or maybe at the church, we want to make sure that we're using Wi-Fi protected access 2, WPA2. Now if you have a more high speed upgrade of a router and you see WPA3, I would use it, but sparingly, because you want to make sure that people are able to connect to it and then actually have some service. So more than likely, you want to make sure that you're using WPA2, and we definitely want to stay away from WPA, just the version 1 issue of it. So we want to make sure we stay away from version 1, but yet we use WPA2. And a lot of times on these routers, if you try to use WPA, just the version 1, it'll give you some type of warning saying, hey, you can use it, but at your own leisure. This is unsafe. Okay, so again, just to kind of to beat this point in is that Wi-Fi protected access 2 is what we want to go with in in our environment. So Wi-Fi protected setup, I've seen this on several home devices, routers, or let's say extenders that you can buy. And I also seen this button. It's a button that you can press on your, let's say, a printer. And instead of going through the actual configurations of finding the website or finding the web page that's associated with that printer and then manually adding it to your router, you can hit a button on your router that says WPS, as well as the button on the printer, and it will do a wireless connection and set up the configurations that way. It's a very convenient access, just to kind of set up new devices into your network if you don't want to go through the hassle of trying to set it up and then going on and finding the web page for it and then doing the configurations manually. You can use this feature to actually connect devices securely to your network. But you want to make sure that your access point firmware is up to date, and we want to make sure that I would suggest that you go in after and still look at the configuration settings and making sure that you have a baseline of what you want on your network. But just to the know for the exam is that it's a convenient way of connecting devices via a button on both devices. But say if you're in an environment where you need people to connect to your Wi-Fi, but you don't necessarily need to track them. So you don't want to put that agent on there, that endpoint agent, in order to keep them safe and protected from anything else, or keep yourself, protected from anything that you don't want them to do to your network. You may want them to go through a open authentication or a captive portal, and this is what you see a lot of times when you go to a motel or some type of a coffee shop, and it has a public Wi-Fi. But whenever we connect, is that it brings you to a splash page, a setup page of saying, "Hey, you're connected," but in order for you to carry on with, sending data back and forth or web surfing, we want you to, one, comply with our policy, and then two, we're going to use this type of encryption while you're actually using our internet. So this might be, like I said, is good for places where you're seeing open Wi-Fi connection and people are coming in and out all the time in order to use the Wi-Fi, and then that's it. You may never see that device ever again. So this is how you can keep yourself protected, but yet at the same time provide that service. Now, remember what I said about having someone putting another access point, or when I say access point, think about another router onto your network. So someone putting another router onto your network, and then now they're routing traffic because you set the SSID up to be broadcast, and then now someone has taken that SSID nomenclature, and then now they want to name something very similar to yours, but now they're using it to route traffic to wherever they want to go, or maybe browsing the traffic or sniffing the traffic, sorry, to see what's going on, what information is passing back and forth. So these are commonly known as rogue access points. That's when someone is not supposed to be there, right? It's a rogue access point. And then you have an evil twin, and that's where, like I said, it's masquerading as a legitimate access point. So we want to make sure that we keep those things, we keep an eye out for them, especially if we're on a networking team, and just making sure that our employees understand what network they should connect to, and if all possible, maybe we want to disable the SSID and make sure that they only have one place for them to actually connect. And the reason why I stress the fact of having a rogue access point on your network, or having an evil twin, is because not only can they sniff the network, but they can do things like this, where they can do a disassociation attack, where they can look at the traffic going forward, back and forth, and then take over that session that you may have open with your bank. And now they can pose as you, just by disassociating your session with that bank, and now they are controlling that session and then routing money wherever they need it to go. So we want to make sure that we want to stop things like this when it comes to disassociation and replay attacks. But in order to do those things, we need to make sure that we have a good understanding of how can a hacker get into our business and then legitimately reroute uh, the data from one spot to the next. Now, another attack you need to be aware of is jamming attacks, and this is where we have a very loud radio signal to actually um, cause a loud interference with our legitimate network signal. So when you think of jamming, I want you guys to think of static within the radio airwaves. So think of if you're old school like me, we grew up on radios and we had antennas with those radios. So if your antenna was not in the perfect setting, then you would get a lot of static in the radio station. So it wouldn't come in as clear as you would want it to be. So you could think of that static being a jamming type of an attack, to where I can hear it, I just can't hear it as clear as I would like it. And in this case of jamming, then it causes a DDoS attack, a denial of service attack, where it's degraded so much to where it's unusable. So we can look for these type of things using a spectrum analyzer, and then hopefully, stopping those type of attacks. But we want to make sure that no one's actually performing these type of attacks against us when it comes to denying our services to our customers. So like I said, denying those services to our customers is basically a a DOS attack, and that's without the D in front of it. So that's the extra D, I'm sorry. So you're talking DOS, denial of service attack. That's where I'm, as a client or as a customer, I'm coming to you for a service and you're not able to give it to me. To give an example is that I'm going to Amazon to buy a headband and Amazon is not up, which is never, but if they're not up and then I can't get to the actual website, then it's a denial of my service. I cannot get to them. Amazon is on the hook for not providing that service, right? So a distributed denial of service is a more targeted angle at a server. So a DOS attack, a regular DOS attack, is just a wild, doesn't have a particular range of where it's going. It's wild and spread out, right? And where a distributed denial of service is that I'm going for the particular server or device that's giving out a particular service. So if I'm looking for, I want to stop payroll next Friday, I'm going to do a DDoS attack on the payroll server in particular. I don't care about the website server. The website server can stay up for all I care. I want to go directly for the payroll and stop people's paycheck on Friday. So that's a distributed denial of service attack. I'm going in on one particular server, and this is done with bots, right? So an attacker will be the commander, and it will command different bots, different PCs. So when you think about a bot, I want you to think about different types of workstations that's all sending traffic to the payroll server. So when I say sending traffic, maybe they're sending an acknowledgement type of a packet, and they're just saying, hey, do this for me, do this for me, do this for me. And everyone, let's give it a round number of 100 PCs, all just kind of going at this one server and saying, hey, please give me this information. And the server, as the nature of a server is to actually take these requests and then give them the answer. And then it will ask for an acknowledgement saying that you got that request or you got the answer that I gave you. But the bots are programmed to not acknowledge. So a server can get overwhelmed if so many requests come in and there is waiting on a response back to those requests and it's never coming. So now it's in a hung up state, causing the denial of service. Okay, so that's a distributed denial of service where we're taking a number of bots and we're attacking this one particular server wherever it may be, and we're causing a particular service to go down. And it's a particular one, not necessarily a spread out one like a denial of service. Now, the way we get around that DDoS and DOS attacks is that we have different servers set up to do the same thing, and we can have them do load balancings and clustering in order to take the traffic in and then distribute it between the different servers all doing the same thing, right? So if we have 4 servers all doing the same thing, let's say they're all doing emails at the same time, right? And we have it load balanced between 4 servers to all provide our company with emails, and then server 1 goes down, then we still have 3 different servers to actually keep email going. So now let's go back to an example when it comes to DDoS attack. Let's say if I'm a hacker and I want to make sure I take down the email, right? I don't like this company, I'm taking down the email, and I got the email address, I got the IP address of one of those email servers, and then I sent all my bots to go in after server 1, right? And I take down server 1, but I realize that the emails are still going because it's load balanced. It's load balanced, and now instead of the emails just coming through and giving a load to server 1, is now distributed out to server 2, 3, and 4, and they are still giving out the email. And now you can have a notification, go to your IT team, say, hey, server 1 is down, don't know the reason, we need to get that back and up and running. And it's no panic, there's no hey, we're down on email. We don't really lose customers like that. We're able to keep our communication going. That's how we kind of get around that denial of service type of scenario. And clustering does the same thing, where we have more than one PC or more than one server creating services, and getting around sharing the load of the request coming in. So this is a good way to get around distributed denial of services, and it should be implemented, but some businesses are not equipped to actually have different servers to actually create that type of load balancing scenario. So this is where the cloud could come into place, to where we could spin up different servers in the cloud in order to have that data go back and forth between those different servers. So the key points to remember is to make sure you go back and you study how networks are set up, and then how do we take our network and make it more secure during the initial setup. And then now, if we make it more secure during an initial setup, then we won't have to make too many changes when we're actually performing our services to whatever group we're providing services to. Make sure that you read up on load balancing and clustering, as well as WPA2, and the different types of settings that we can put our routers on in order to make communications more secure. So lesson 10, let's start talking about network security and the appliances that we use in order to create that security. We're normally going to go over firewalls, proxies, um, different types of SIMs. So all these things that we want to put on our network to create kind of a blanket around our network and keep things secure. So let's talking about firewalls. So when we're talking about firewalls, we're talking about a appliance that sits at the edge of your network, and it takes in the data from your internet supplier. So if you're thinking about a home setting, you're probably thinking about that router that your phone company came in and they hooked up, and now you have the internet from this router. Well, then within that router, it has a firewall, and what it does is that it looks at the packets coming from the devices in your home communicating to that router, and then before it sends it out or takes anything in, it inspects it and is looking at where things need to go, but more importantly, if things are allowed and not allowed. When it comes to a list, a access control list, if it's allowed or not allowed. If it's not allowed, then it drops the packet. It doesn't come into your system or in your network. Now, if you're thinking about a more enterprise network, we're talking about a network firewall that's probably sitting out there and it's its own different appliance. It is not mixed in with its router. It probably goes right to the DMARC, and that DMARC is where the phone company will put their internet connection in, and then that firewall is just going to connect to that connection in order to bring that traffic in, and then that firewall is probably going to have its own configuration page that we'll go to, and we'll set our rules up on what we want to allow in or go out. So just understand that your firewall is sitting at that edge, that perimeter, and is looking at the traffic going in and out. Now, whenever you come across the word stateful inspection firewalls, you want to understand that it's keeping a log of the connection that's going in within the network. So just think of along with the access control list that is checking to see if you're allowed in or we need to deny you, is going to keep a record of whoever makes a connection. And a lot of times this is done at the layer 7 of the OSI model. Now, if you don't know what the OSI model, I suggest that we go ahead and just look that up on Google and figure out what I'm talking about when it comes to the different layers of communication when it comes to data traffic. But it's probably going to keep a record at the application layer, that's layer 7, and then create a second list that it can make sure that it understands when data comes in, who has that connection, and when that connection has become inactive. So I touched on a little bit about how firewalls are actually implemented, how they're actually put into different types of networks. So if we're talking about a home network, we're probably talking about it being actually integrated with your router. And then we will have to go into the router configurations and then maybe go into a setting that's just for firewall settings. But you also have firewall settings on your local device, and those will be more your host-based firewalls. So if you look on your PC or your Mac, you probably could find the configurations for your firewall in there. Just think about it like this, where you have traffic coming into your network, that's fine, but sometimes it's not perfect, right? It's not going to catch everything that we want to be blocked, and it may get to a second point of your actual laptop, but your laptop has a firewall installed on it in order to double check the traffic coming in, but it also, you can granularly make those settings a little bit more tougher, so to say, to where you're not allowing everything in. And so if we didn't catch it at the network side, maybe we can catch it at the local side. And so just think about those type of those settings. That's another way of implementing defense in depth. Whether you got past one appliance, but I'm able to catch you at the local level. Check, check, check. Mic check 1 2. So network address translation, or for short, we're going to call it NAT. And NAT is when we have our addresses change when leaving the network and when they come into the network. So whenever we send a data packet out to a Google server, the internal address that we're going from, our internal address may be 192.168.1.15. But once it gets to our router and it says, hey, I need to go to google.com, then it changes it to a public IP. And that way, people are not able to come to your firewall and know exactly what IP address that you're at behind that firewall. So network address translation changes that IP to a public IP address, and then it sends it out over the wire to wherever Google servers may be at that time. And then on the way back, the router should be smart enough to take that public IP address and say, oh, okay, let's change it back to the internal IP addresses and send it to its proper owner that's here in the internal network. So going back to firewalls, firewalls don't necessarily have to be physical appliances that you buy from a company and they ship it in through a box and you unpackage it and then mount it in a server rack. You can actually have these things if you're utilizing a cloud service. You can have a virtual firewall that's actually housed by the cloud provider, and you will utilize that application to actually filter out packets that's coming into your cloud network, or sit it at the end of your network, and now you have it filtering out those packets. So just to know that it's not always something that's out of the box physical that you can touch, and then you fix the configurations that way. We can have places to where we can use and utilize these virtual firewalls to actually provide more security to things that we have out there in the cloud. So network-based intrusion detection system. So IDSs at the network level they will sense an attack, and they will track that attack. That's the difference between a prevention system and a detection system. Detection is there to utilize the detection part of it. It's going to look at the traffic, maybe record the traffic, maybe alert you on what's actually going on, but it won't take any actions to actually prevent. And so we can have this at the network level. So hence the word network base. That's going to sit out there with our routers, our firewalls, and our switches, and it's going to overlook the network as a whole. But we still can have it at our local level, our host base level, and track that traffic as well. So just like how we had something tracking and detecting the motions, the characteristics of the attack, in a IDS, a IPS will actually prevent. It will take action and actually shut down maybe the traffic flow. It may um, put the workstation into a quarantine state and prevent an attack from going any further. So again, breaking down what we see here on the slide, a network base, meaning it sits on our network and it oversees everything that's coming into our network and leaving out. And then the intrusion prevention system prevents attacks from going any further. Now they also can still detect and still monitor and give us alerts as well as the IDSs, but it takes that extra step by actually preventing the attack. So whenever we're talking about systems that have a signature-based detection feature, is more likely going to pull down some type of definitions and is going to look at those definitions and then compare the malware to them. And then if they match up, then they're probably going to say, hey, that's an attack, or this is a virus of some sort. Normally you see signature bases, this feature in antivirus malware protection software. So every day your antivirus application will receive definitions of the latest virus that's out. And what it does is it keeps a database of it, and then whenever it sees something uh, that's new to your system, or it may, whenever you perform a scan, it's checking the signature based database against the files that you have on your computer. And then if they see a match, then they will quarantine whatever file that is, ask you if you want to, delete it, or it will go ahead and take that action and actually go through with deleting that file. So a lot of systems just won't be signature based systems. Some of them actually go off the behavior based detection or some type of anomaly based detection. So to explain that, you have to know what normal is in your environment. So you can't be a company that's constantly changing what the normal is, or hey, we did do things this way, but now we're doing it this way. Because what these systems do is they sit on your network and actually see, record the actions that's going down, and then they determine a baseline, or you configure a baseline, and then anything that's outside of that baseline or that actual foundation that you set is considered a abnormal behavior, and is detected and then flagged as such, and maybe even prevented. So in order to have these systems in your network, you really need to have a good grasp on what is actually normal for us. And then these systems are great to have, because any deviations from that could be looked at as a abnormal condition. Now, other appliances that we need to be aware of is next gen firewalls, as well as content filters. And when we're talking about next gen firewalls, I want you guys to think about the way your application talks to the internet. And what I mean by that is, to give an example of Microsoft Word, you pull up Word and you get to type whatever document that you want to make, or you get to read whatever you want to someone sent to you. But Microsoft Word has so many functionalities that's going on behind the scenes, that it's making constant calls out to different servers at any given time to pull down different templates, different fonts, even just a overall update to the overall application. So when it's doing these calls, this behind the scene work, we would like to have a firewall looking at that type of traffic to see what's coming in and what's going out. So this is where the next gen firewall will come at, where it's more application savvy, and is able to look at that traffic and disseminate what needs to come in and what needs to stay out. So keep those things in mind when we're talking about next gen firewalls. We're talking about layer 7 application, being able to watch that traffic at the layer 7 level. Now, content filters is where we're going to watch our web usage, and then what websites are we going to, what categories are we going to, and we're utilizing that work. This is a good way to put a hand over what our users are actually doing, and is it benefiting the business at the point in time. Are we using too much time on our social media platforms rather than using business related materials and websites? So we can have these URL filters in, or a content filter or web filter appliance on our network to actually watch the traffic, block any traffic that we don't want. And what I mean by traffic is blocking any type of website that we don't want our users to go to or even stumble upon, right? So, because a lot of times we could be on a legitimate site that has a bad link on it, and then that redirects traffic out to a bad site, right? So these content filters can go out there and they can watch for things like that, and then alert us if we have any heavy usage of streaming platforms, or if we don't allow Spotify to be ran on our network. We can see who's actually trying to get in contact with that server. So like I touched on with network IDSs, we're now at the host-based IDS, and again, this is going to be on your local machine, probably your local desktop or laptop, and it's going to be some type of agent that's actually looking at the traffic that's going out. Because remember, we can't stop everything at the network level. There are going to be some things that get in, but our defense in depth minded platform, we can put things on our local devices to actually catch things that may have gotten past our network side of appliances. So remember, IDSs is detecting the traffic and giving you an alert, whereas IPSs are actually preventing. So just like how we had with our virtual firewalls, we can also have something on our local machine watching that application traffic go in and out. And that's more likely going to be your web application firewalls, or short WAF for short. And it's doing exactly what we specified before when it came to the virtual firewalls. It's going to watch at that the traffic leaving out of your applications and going out there and talking back to whatever prospective servers they need to talk to. And so when I say that, I want you guys to think about applications such as Adobe Acrobat Reader, or any Microsoft product, that whole suite. We talk about Photoshop, anything where it's not just that application sitting on your machine. It's going to go out and update the features on it, the comfort features, or it's going to give you a new font every 6 months or what have you. And these things, when it goes out and it grabs those updates, remember, that's data going out and then coming back. Now, say if I intercepted that and I throw something else in there, and me being a hacker, I could throw something else in there, and now I got past your network firewall and your anti-malware systems by saying, hey, I'm legitimate traffic going into this application. But if I have my WAF set up, or if I have my virtual firewall set up to look at that type of traffic, then we could probably cut it off and prevent those things from happening. So with all these appliances, monitoring different types of network traffic, as well as things that are being downloaded, is a must. We want to see what type of traffic is coming in, not necessarily blocking everything, but we want to make sure that we look at what's coming through, what could be an issue later on, and monitoring those things are very vital to the network's health. And so having the proper logs set up and being able to have someone look over those logs, because logs are only good enough if we're actually looking at the logs to see what's going on our network, right? So having these services is a must, and it helps us prevent attacks from happening. So this is where our SIM will come into play, right? Our SIM stands for Security Information and Event Management. And this appliance is going to sit out there on a network level, right? Sit out there with the routers and the proxies and the firewalls, the physical firewalls, and it's going to look at all that traffic and record the events that's happening. So this is going to fall under that category of a intrusion detection system, and it's going to look at that traffic and record things, and then when it sees something that's out of the way, or sees something of the abnormal activity, then it will alert anyone who's on that email list or who it needs to alert. Right now, you can have some systems excuse me, you can have some systems actually take precedence over that and actually prevent attacks from happening, but more than likely your SIM is going to be there for reference and logging information. So once you have that log information down, and we're collecting all those logs on what's going down, and then we actually have the right time for each log, we need someone to actually build reports and be able to analyze that type of information. So we want to make sure that we look at this information and we understand it That way we can build a baseline of what's normal for us, right? What's normal for the business. How can we, anything that's out of the ordinary, now we can determine what's out of the ordinary because we've looked at our log so much to where we have a baseline of where we should be operating at. So the key points to review when it comes to lesson 10, we went over different types of firewalls, proxies, IDSs and IPSs. Remember the difference between those. But we also talked about the importance of a SIM, having those log information and making sure that we can have the integrity of our logs by having the right time on them. So go over these things, understand what each appliance does when it comes to a network appliance